hear you guys. Let's start this again. Good morning, New York. Good morning. That's much better. So my name is Ruth Yakubu. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft at the Azure team. And we have an awesome event planned for you today. Today is going to be an event for developers. And also we have a live streaming audience streaming this event for you, with you guys. And we're confident that when you leave today, you're going to be learning something new. So take a lot of good notes and all of that. And also for you guys that are on Twitter, use the hashtag RedShirtDevTour, and my team is going to be monitoring your questions, your concern, and also feel free to take any selfies that you have. We love to see that. And yeah, sincerely, we've enjoyed putting this event for you, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we do putting this event for you. So now, introducing the man in the red shirt, Microsoft's Executive Vice President of Cloud and Enterprise, Scott Guthrie.
Thanks, Ruth. Great. Can people hear me okay? Yep. Is the mic on? Great. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. It's awesome to be here in New York. And I'm really looking forward to the next couple hours as we dive deep into Azure and sort of build a whole bunch of great things in the cloud. Quick show of hands. How many people here have used Azure before? Okay, about half the hands. Great. How many people here have used other cloud providers before? Great. How many people here are .NET and Visual Studio developers? Great. How many people here are doing Node? Great. Java? Great. Python? Great. Well, lots of Python, good. Let's see, Go. Ruby. Cool. PHP. Awesome. Well, we got hopefully some stuff here today for all of you. And I'm going to, throughout the day, we're going to build lots and lots of stuff. I think I have like 42 demos that I'm doing over the next couple hours. And one of the things I'm going to try to do is really kind of introduce you to the cloud and Azure, and kind of for people that are brand new to it, provide an end-to-end. We're going to go deep in a whole bunch of topics. And so generally, this is the 5th event I've done this week. And even people that said I've been using Azure for 4 years were like, whoa, I learned so much stuff. And so hopefully you'll find, even if you're an advanced user of Azure, a whole bunch of new things to take away. And then I'm going to deliberately do development in a couple different languages on both a PC as well as a Mac. Just again to highlight the richness that we have and how you can really take advantage of any technology with Azure and build some really amazing things with it. So one of the things I've been saying for years now, but I think every year it's more true than the last, is that this is really just a great time to be a developer. When you think about all the different technologies that are out there for us to start experimenting with and use today, it's never really been richer. Whether it's with new immersive experiences with mixed reality, whether it's new scenarios like IoT, where you have internet-connected products that are sending data and telemetry. Whether it's on the back end with things like containers and serverless computing, new data storages like NoSQL, in addition to kind of global relational scale databases. Whether it's around analytics and AI, and whether it's around not just technology, but also new practices and approaches for doing development like DevOps. The list of capabilities and things that we can take advantage of has never been greater. At the same time, the other thing I do hear from a lot of people is it's kind of overwhelming. There's lots and lots of new technology. And the other thing that we certainly hear a lot is, how do I actually keep up to date with all these technologies? How do I not feel like I'm falling behind? How do I increasingly build solutions that are not only great from a technology perspective, but increasingly people expect are going to drive revenue to my company and really transform our businesses sometimes in new digital ways. The pressure mounts. And then last, but perhaps most important, how do I not get hacked? And in a world where the security environment online has never been kind of more scary, how do you build solutions with all this new technology and make sure that you're building them right and building them secure? And it's a lot of these kind of concerns that kind of help shape a lot of how we try to build Azure. And a couple things that hopefully you'll see reflected throughout the talk and especially throughout the demos today are these kind of 4 themes, which is, we're trying to build a cloud that allows you to take advantage of bleeding-edge technology, and all of those buzzwords that I mentioned on the previous slide, you can take advantage of, and you'll see a lot of them today throughout the demos. But we're also trying to do it in a way that enables you to be productive. And so it isn't just throwing technology at you, but we're trying to both in terms of the services that we provide, but also then the management tools and the development experience we provide, enable you to actually connect a lot of these pieces together and really nail a lot of the end-to-end solutions much, much faster than you could before. We're trying to make sure that you can run these things everywhere. And one of the things we recognize, especially for businesses and enterprises that have existing investments, is that you need a way to build these cloud solutions to take advantage of those and integrate with them. And so you'll see a lot of focus around hybrid throughout the demos, and in terms of enabling you to use what you already have and be able to leverage it even better with the cloud. You're going to see a big focus around intelligence, both in terms of, I have a sort of section specifically on AI, where we'll walk through doing object detection with video. We'll talk about creating custom AI algorithms. And those are some of the great services that we have inside Azure. But you also see sort of this intelligence reflected throughout the product, where we're also trying to do things like build in automatic security notifications, build in automatic profilers that can basically help guide you to better optimize your code and your solutions. And wherever possible, have kind of AI algorithms that are there that help make you more successful. And then last but not least is how do we build this in a trusted way and make sure that we have the right security defaults, right security capabilities built into the product, and the right trust certifications that you can run your apps and target literally any business. So one of the things I mentioned here is sort of the end-to-end experience. And again, hopefully you'll see this reflected throughout the demos of how we've really tried to focus on how do we provide not just services and technology, but really enable you to kind of complete end-to-end scenarios faster, whether it's around management, whether it's around CI/CD workflows for deploying your code into production, whether it's around DevOps. And so what I thought I'd do is actually escape out of PowerPoint now, since we're going to mostly be demo-driven today, and kind of walk through a little bit of the Azure management experience and kind of ground you a little bit in terms of our admin tools, but also show off kind of what I mean a little bit in terms of how we're trying to kind of guide this experience to be super productive. So what I'm going to do here is log into the Azure Management Console. And so this is a browser-based admin tool that works with any browser, obviously, and allows you to effectively manage all the resources that you deploy inside the cloud. And so you can see here on the left-hand nav, if I want to see all my virtual machines, I click the virtual machine link, and it lists them all. And then I can dive into any individual resource and get kind of a management experience where I can change settings, where I have kind of default monitoring views in terms of how that particular resource is doing, and so forth. And throughout today, we're going to look at container services, we're going to look at VMs, we're going to look at web apps, databases, NoSQL systems, et cetera. They all show up on that left nav. And if you want to create any resource inside Azure, you can go ahead and just click the New button. And this basically gives you access to create over 100 different services. Some of them infrastructure, like VMs, compute, and storage. But most of today, we're actually going to focus on some of our higher-level developer services that give you an even more finished environment that you can deploy your code in. So for example, database as a service, where we take care of patching and running the database, and you don't have to think about it as a VM. Instead, you can think about it as a database with an SLA. Now, one of the cool things about the cloud is just the fact that you can create all this stuff literally with your fingertips and get access to resources that previously were sort of unimaginable in terms of size. So one of the questions I've been asking people throughout this tour is, what's the largest machine, virtual machine or physical machine that you ever have worked with in your previous life up until today? 2 cores. Can anyone beat 2 cores? Yeah. We're going to make it interactive today, so feel free to shout out here. 14, 16. 40. I feel like I'm in an auction. Can anyone beat 40? 40 cores. 40 is it, okay. Okay, well, so, you know, one of the things you can do in Azure is you can basically click New VM, and you can select, you know, a lot of cores. You know, our largest virtual machine size now in Azure is 20 terabytes of RAM and 750 CPU cores. That's a big machine. It's optimized for like very, very large SAP workloads where you're running your complete financials. What I'm going to show you here is another virtual machine. I'm going to call nested demo that we're going to remote into. This is our M series of VMs. And this one has 128 CPU cores and 4 terabytes of physical memory. And so, you know, this is sort of large, not large based on the largest size inside Azure, but larger than most people probably ever touched and used. And again, the cool thing is you can hit new, you can get this thing deployed in 60 to 90 seconds, do whatever you want with it, and then you can turn it off, and you pay only for effectively the seconds that you're actually running that particular VM. This VM is kind of cool also in the sense of, so let's actually remote into it. So you can actually see all these 128 cores, mostly idle at the moment. And so we're just remote desktoped into this VM. What's cool about this VM is not just that there's lots of CPU and memory, but, and this is true for a lot of the new systems that we have, the new VM families, is this VM type also supports what's called nested virtualization. So don't just think of this as one VM. This is one VM that in turn has 2 VMs running inside it. And that's something that no other cloud provider today provides. And so you can see here I'm running Hyper-V inside this virtual machine in Azure. And now if I double click this, oops, I am now into another VM running inside the VM running inside Azure, which is something you can't do anywhere else. And then just for giggles and grins, you'll notice this VM that's in a VM inside Azure is also running a virtualization stack. And so I can now double click into a Linux machine running inside a Windows machine, running inside another VM, which is running inside Azure. And so I can kind of be like Inception-like and just keep going down as part of it. What's hard? Go deeper. Yeah. We could just spend the whole next 5 hours just double clicking deeper and deeper, and then realize it's just a dream. So you know, you might ask yourself, why is nested virtualization cool? I mean, from a technology perspective, this is cool, but you know, what would I actually do with it? And you know, one of the cool things you actually can do this, and you'll see it a little bit later when we talk about containers inside Azure, is this capability of nested virtualization is really useful when you're deploying a container-driven application, because now you can actually isolate each container instance inside a server in its own virtualization boundary. So you have your own security perimeter. You can make sure that no container can allocate more than a certain amount of memory and kill the system. And you can make sure that if a container goes wild, it can't go ahead and crash the overall container node that it's running on. And so, you know, this is sort of cool both from a tech perspective, but there is actually real practical usages of it as well that we as developers can take advantage of. Let's look at some of the other capabilities that we have across Azure from an overall management perspective. So, you know, one of the things you can do on any of these VMs, as you saw me do with that nested VM, is sort of double click on it and see a whole bunch of details around, you know, what's the network activity, what's the CPU activity, what's the storage activity, et cetera. And, you know, we let you manage it where, you know, you can control, for example, you know, the network ports, the disks, you can resize the VM, you can install extensions in it, et cetera. And, you know, and we have a nice experience for that. So this is, for example, how you manage network ports. And so you can see I have a bunch of rules to sort of deny access to this particular VM, except for certain ports. and all the standard stuff that we've had in Azure for years and other cloud providers have as well for managing kind of VM activities. What makes Azure a little unique, or actually pretty unique, is that we also now add into here, oops, let me zoom a little less so you can see more. We also now have in here a number of other operations that we've integrated as part of the management experience, which allows you to go deeper than just turning on and turning off VMs and changing network ports. And really, again, lets you do kind of end-to-end scenarios that would be very difficult if you just have the raw Lego blocks that you're trying to work with. So for example, if you wanted to set up DR, or you wanted to do patch compliance, or you want to be able to track inventory across all your applications and infrastructure, we make this really easy, and it's just directly now in the left-hand navigation experience of every VM inside Azure. So for example, if I click the update management extension, this causes Azure to actually query an agent that's running inside the VM. So it's basically just querying it, checking on its patch compliance. And it now will tell me whether or not I have any missing updates that aren't currently applied on the VM from a security perspective. And you can see here, and thankfully on this VM, I am patched at the OS level, but you can see that I don't have the latest anti-malware signatures installed. That's something I need to go ahead and do because this is a VM that I'm managing to make sure it's complete and up to date. What's nice about this is it doesn't just work on the individual VM, but I can also, for example, manage this across multiple servers and VMs running across my Azure environment. And so clicking on this multiple computer one now tells me all of the systems that I have and how many of them are missing updates. And you see I have 3 VMs out of, I guess, almost 400 that are missing some type of update that I need to go ahead and apply. And again, this sort of ability to kind of check and see, regardless of whether it's Linux or Windows-based, whether the OS patches are applied and whether the thing is up to date is super, super useful. And today, with most cloud providers, and with Azure even a year ago, you'd have to kind of manually do this or manually write scripts or buy separate tools in order to do it. What's nice about Azure, again, going back to the hybrid aspect, is this works, for example, for all my VMs inside Azure. But you'll notice as I scroll down here, I can also use this for non-Azure VMs. And so one of the nice things, again, about our management stack is not only can I manage Azure resources, but I can also go ahead here and just click Add Non-Azure Computer and point to, for example, a server that's running in my existing data center on premises, whether it's VMware-based or Hyper-V-based or bare metal, or even a VM that's running, say, in Amazon or another cloud provider. And I can now basically do my patch compliance everywhere with a single set of tools and know where I'm up to date. And I can also patch them all automatically from these tools as well. Other things that are kind of built in to Azure now that make life a lot easier is what we call inventory management. So again, this is querying the VM live, making sure that I actually have the latest up to date. So I'll just take a second as it's actually hitting the VM and pulling back that information. Hopefully not more than a second. There we go. And what inventory management lets you do is it's going to basically tell me everything that's actually on that particular VM. So if I want to know, hey, is this installed? Is this registry setting set? Is this service running? If this is a Linux box, is this Linux daemon active? I can now actually do that without even having to remote into the VM. And then more importantly, again, I can go ahead and manage multiple systems across my fleet. And so if I want to know, for example, and I read about there's a security vulnerability in a particular setting or malware that sets a particular registry key, I can just go ahead, look at the registry key settings, and I can now search across literally thousands of machines and understand whether or not that registry key is enabled or not. And again, I can do this for both Windows and Linux. So for example, if I want to know, hey, am I actually using the apt update installer, I can. And I can actually even see which version is installed on which system across my fleet. And so this is sort of a common Linux update mechanism that I can use. And again, I have a single place now that I can query for all the inventory and all the state across my entire environment, all literally just sort of built into the experience. And then lastly, in terms of from a management and update perspective, the other thing that we have that's built in that's kind of cool, and again, it works for a single VM, or you can do it across multiple, is what we call change tracking. And so this actually will allow me to see all of the updates that I've applied anywhere across the environment, again, both at the infrastructure level within Azure, but also inside the VM, whether it's Windows or Linux-based. And so if I want to know, hey, what happened at 509? What did we modify? I can drill in, and I can actually see all of the Linux daemons, all the files, all the registries, all the services that were started or stopped across, again, all my systems running in Azure, all the systems running on premises, all the systems running in a different cloud provider, both Windows and Linux, and be able to kind of immediately understand that, be able to query against it, and always know what my environment looks like and what the state is. So these are just sort of examples of sort of built-in management capabilities that, as you can see, we just sort of integrate into the overall experience. The other thing we've integrated, just on the management front here, that's sort of top of mind for a lot of people right now, given a lot of the weather situation, both with hurricanes and fires and other things, is natural disaster and DR support. And so if I click on that DR experience inside the Azure Management Console, you can see here I can take any VM or any system inside Azure and configure it for DR, where I can basically replicate that environment somewhere else to another Azure region, and be able to make sure that I always have a DR location on standby. And then I can even test the DR automatically using these built-in tools. At any point, I can push a button and fail over my systems to a completely different Azure region. And so if I know that a storm is coming, I could fail out to a different part of the country and make sure that I'm basically secure even if that particular region ends up having an issue or getting hit. And so this is sort of, again, all built in a way that no other cloud provider delivers, and makes it super easy for you to be able to take advantage of and set up and wire across your environment. The DR support also, just like the other things I showed, work in a hybrid environment. So if you've got, again, VMware or bare metal servers or Hyper-V on premises, you can also use this to basically configure DR to Azure from your existing on-premise servers. And then the other thing that we see a lot of customers take advantage of is use this DR capability to migrate to the cloud. And so what they do is they set up DR originally. They can test their existing systems in the cloud. And then if they want to migrate to the cloud, they just fail over to the cloud. And once they do, they continue running in the cloud from that point on. So lots of easy ways you can kind of, again, integrate a nice overall management experience and give you something pretty rich and custom. So all the stuff I'm showing here, I'm showing from a GUI perspective. So I'm just using standard web browser and using the graphical experience that we have with our portal. The other thing that we have inside Azure, obviously, though, is rich command line tools as well as rich SDKs that you can take advantage of to programmatically modify your Azure resources as well. And one of the things you might notice here at the top of the Azure portal is this little button. Little beeping sound. I'm not sure whose phone that is. There's a thing called the Cloud Shell that you can also go ahead and launch. And so rather than have to download the bash scripts or the PowerShell commandlets and run them locally on your system, you can actually just go ahead and click this Cloud Shell. This will launch in the browser. And we're not simulating, like in this case here, a bash shell in the browser. Instead, this is actually spinning up a VM dynamically behind the scenes in Azure. We pay for it, so you don't have to pay anything for it. And then we basically are connecting our portal to it so that you can just type in the browser and effectively have a full interactive bash experience anywhere that can basically manage your Azure environment. And again, you can not only do this with bash, but you can also, if you wanted to, toggle into PowerShell mode, and we can do the same thing with PowerShell commandlets. This, again, provides a simple way that you can be anywhere on any system and manage your environment. And obviously, you can download the tools and run them locally in your local bash shell or PowerShell environment as well. And this is a real environment. It literally is a real server. So if I say PS all, you can actually see here are the Linux processes running in this VM inside Azure. I could even go ahead and type vim. And it will load vim in the browser here. And so if I wanted to, I could say, help, I can't escape. Little vim joke there. And then the other thing that we have is a tool that's built in and pre-installed, which is our AZ tool, which basically gives you the Azure CLI. And this basically allows you to manage any of your Azure resources. And so we have kind of, you say AZ VM list as an example, would list all your VMs. Say AZ app service list, it'll list all your app services. And you can create and delete things. So if I want to, for example, again, list some VMs, I could say AZ VM list. I'm going to output this as a table. And what you'll see here is a list of all my VMs and where they're running inside Azure listed as a pretty table. And again, you can use this CLI to manage everything. The PowerShell experience obviously integrates directly inside PowerShell, and so you do commandlets to do piping and so forth. And all of this stuff, both the portal and the command line, is calling REST APIs behind the scenes, which are actually doing the real work. And these REST APIs, you can basically also program directly if you want to just talk directly to our management stack. And then we also have .NET, Java, Python, PHP, Ruby, Go, Java SDKs that you can use from a management perspective as well to do everything. So everything you're going to see today, you can also do, I'd show in the GUI, you can also do, again, programmatically or through automation. And then the last thing I'll just show in this first demo is our built-in monitoring support. And you can get access to this directly with the monitoring tab here on the left-hand side of the portal. And the monitor experience gives you kind of an easy way that you can look across all your resources inside Azure and be able to kind of monitor and see the health of them. And one of the things we hear often with the cloud, and what you'll experience if you're new to the cloud, is building apps is sort of an important step one of what you need to work on. But step two is once you actually build them and start running them, understanding how are they performing, and more importantly, when they aren't doing something the right way, how do I debug it, is its own unique set of challenges, because you might have lots of services deployed, you might be doing lots of complex stuff at very large scale, and having to figure that out and wire up your own monitoring and management experience for running things can be difficult. And so what we try to do here with the monitor experience that's built into Azure is make that pretty easy. And so if you click monitor, it brings up this environment here. This allows me to see, for example, any alerts that I've configured. And so you'll see later in the afternoon, we'll talk about how you can programmatically be told if something is having a problem. I could also go ahead and click on, let's say, for example, this front end here. Just going to pick up a resource. And if I click on this metrics view, I can actually see health monitoring metrics for any of the resources I deploy in Azure. And so in this case here, I can look at the network in, the network out. I could basically look at any number of different settings, the disk bytes. And for anything that you pull up metrics about, you can just go ahead and click this pin to dashboard experience. And now when I do that, you'll see that not only can I look it up when I need to, but I can also create these and pin them to my dashboard inside Azure. I could resize these to be wherever I want. I could move them around to kind of layer them and customize them in my overall management experience. And then when I don't need them, I can just delete them. And so we have, again, a pretty easy way that you can go ahead and pull up metrics about everything. And then the other thing I'll just show now, and then we'll look at more later, is log analytics support. And this basically doesn't just give you kind of a pretty graphical view of common metrics, but rather lets you write arbitrary log queries against all the telemetry that your infrastructure and your apps are creating. And you can basically write custom queries that can search for anything and do incredibly custom visualizations and analysis on how your stuff is performing. And so, for example, here, I've got a whole bunch of subscriptions, so it's going to take just a second to load. And I can either do kind of default queries as part of the log search experience, or there's also a nice capability now called Advanced Analytics that you can take advantage of. And this will launch kind of a whole interactive monitoring explorer. And so, for example, if I wanted to look at all of the different log entries that my infrastructure is outputting, I could run a query like this. So I'm going to look at everything in the last day. And this will basically bring back thousands of different entries of log entries that have basically triggered inside my application. And what's cool about these log entries is, A, they're very rich, but B, I can also do arbitrary queries against them. So if I wanted to look at, for example, what is the average processor time of all my resources over the last 7 days, I could write a query like this, which will actually compute aggregate data. And you'll notice the last statement says render it as a chart. And so I can even go ahead and do custom visualizations in addition to bringing back textual results. And so now it's rendering this as a chart, and it shows me my CPU utilization. You might notice, hey, there's a spike there. Hey, that's a simple, something weird's going on. I can now debug deeper into that and try to understand why. And the beauty about all this stuff is I can do it at real time, and I can write arbitrary queries. These aren't pre-canned reports. These are actually live queries I'm running against millions of data points collected by Azure. A couple other things you can do that's kind of cool about our monitoring system that I'll call out is the ability to also not just query the infrastructure itself, but also go ahead and search into your application log data as well. And so this is going to look at my web server logs and basically chart automatically what type of browsers are hitting my application. And so this is going to basically pull out the different user agents from the raw HTTP logs of my web servers. And I can now see over time what type of browsers have been basically accessing my application. And I can go ahead and even take my app telemetry plus my infrastructure telemetry and merge it together. And so this is a query now that's looking at my web server activity for my logs, but also then looking at my CPU activity across my infrastructure and rendering it as a chart. And I can now look for correlations on number of HTTP web hits and CPU utilization across my fleet to understand, is the reason why my CPU is spiking because of a lot of traffic, or is it because of a patch, or is it because of something else that might be a bug inside my application? And these are just sort of examples of the types of queries that you can run. The beauty about Azure is you can run any type of query against your log telemetry that you want, and you can capture any amount of log telemetry from any of the systems that you build, and it's super easy to query. We use the system ourselves to actually run Azure as well as Office 365 and Dynamics 365 at Microsoft, and we capture about 5 petabytes of log entries per day just running our own application. So we capture a lot of telemetry. And the beauty is it'll show up here in under 60 seconds from the point an event happens, and you can write these interactive queries against all of the log telemetry that you send and be able to get these sort of responses with the type of perf I showed here in near real time. So it makes it a lot easier, again, once you actually build your systems to run it and manage it. And again, every custom query that you write, you can just go ahead and pin it to your dashboard. And now every time you log in, you can also see those charts and that telemetry so you know how your system's performing. So anyways, that's a little bit in terms about logging and monitoring. Last thing I'll just go ahead and hit on this first set of demos here is how, I showed you how you can do it in a browser. Obviously, it works on any device. It even works, on your mobile device as well. So if we can switch to my iPhone here, we also have native experiences. Hopefully, we can switch to machine 3, I think. All right. Machine 3. Let's try it one more time. Machine 3, iPhone? No, not working. Okay. Well, if it was working, what you'd see is you also can go ahead and use the native apps that we have on mobile devices so that you can actually manage your Azure environment directly from your phone when you're on the go. And typically, you're not going to be doing massive different operations there, but you can see the status of your resources. You can do basic operations like restarting them or stopping them. You can see alerts. And you can even launch both the Bash and PowerShell shells on your phone. And so if you're out at dinner and with your family and you're a little bored, you just put the phone under the table, and you can use Vim, and you can create any number of VMs that you want inside Azure and manage it, all while you're waiting for the food to deliver at a restaurant. So that might not be the best and most safe way to do your massive operations and patch management under the table, but you now at least have that option. And again, it is useful when you are out and you do see some alert go off, you can actually quickly at least get a sense of what's going on and do basic operations literally on the go anywhere. So that was sort of just, again, a quick survey tour of a lot of the different Azure capabilities. Let's go back to the slides and just cover a little bit more overview content, and then we'll drill in and start building some apps. So, one of the things that's nice about Azure is, I showed off kind of that nice management experience, and, we talked about the scale of the infrastructure in terms of VM sizes you can use. You can also use this stuff everywhere. And so this map here shows you what we call Azure regions, which are clusters of multiple data centers where you can go ahead and deploy code and applications. And so we have 42 geographic regions around the world today where you can deploy and run your systems. And that's more locations and data centers than any other cloud provider. And this gives you kind of maximum ability to kind of really build systems on a global scale and really reach a global audience. Now, what's impressive about each of these little white dots is also just the size of the facilities themselves. I like to joke, you can see these from space, and it's actually true, you can. And what I thought I'd do is just show a quick video that highlights just one of these regions and gives you a sense of what goes on inside them. So just go watch the video. So we play the sound. So these things are really big, you got lots of capacity. The other thing we do with each of our regions and all of our cloud services is audit them and make sure that we have the right compliance certifications in place so that you can take advantage of all this capacity and all these capabilities to build apps that can really target any industry. And so, we have the standard stuff like ISO and SOC 2 and things like you'd expect there. We have PCI, so if you're doing credit card or commercial data, you can basically build systems for there. We have HIPAA for healthcare. We have FDA if you're in the pharmaceutical space. And if you're targeting, say, the U.S. government, we even have DoD DISA level 5, which is the highest level of rating for U.S. Department of Defense. And we have lots and lots of other regional and government certifications. And collectively, these basically give you the ability to build systems and deliver them to customers pretty much for any industry anywhere in the world. And we've got tremendous amounts of customers that are taking advantage of all this great capability today. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies now are deployed and running on Azure and in the Microsoft Cloud. And this is just a sampling of some of the logos that are deployed on Azure today. And what I want to do now is just play another quick video of a couple of these customers talking about their experiences and what they're doing with Azure. So let's go ahead and play the video.
Microsoft Azure gives us key cloud-based infrastructure that we need. We made a big decision to break down our existing platform, which was one big, large, monolithic lump of software, into a microservice architecture.
This Black Friday, we served 167 million requests in the 24 hours. Average page response times came down by about half a second. That's what you're looking for in a new platform.
We moved to a platform as a service model. We can roll out changes to any region and environment very quickly and also provision new environments much faster.
It really allowed us to focus on just shipping code.
We are using Azure Functions now in some components of our ordering system.
We only pay for that data that we and those functions that we do use. And we know that Azure is always going to be at the cutting edge of any cloud technology.
We wanted to make it really easy for our customers to get meaning out of their data. The industrial Internet of Things is different only in the fact that our customers have very stringent requirements about how data moves. We want one place to egress that data that we can lock down. The advantage of it being Azure is IoT Hubs makes it very easy to get that data in. Power BI makes it very easy to visualize that data once it's there.
It allows us to put a data scientist in a box.
Microsoft helped us achieve our digital transformation. It's put us over the top. Geico's been growing leaps and bounds, and we have not had any issues whatsoever from a capacity perspective because of the on-demand capability and scalability of Azure. We can handle the volume. We're like, bring it on. We want more.
Great. So we've talked a lot about the kind of the overview of Azure, and give you that first demo experience, kind of the end-to-end experience that we're trying to provide. What I'm going to do now for the rest of the talk is go deeper into the actual services that Azure delivers. And the way to think about Azure from a capability perspective is there's a whole bunch of infrastructure capabilities, like the ones I showed earlier in terms of giant VMs and networking and storage at the bottom. And then there's a whole bunch of these platform services that live on top. And I think from a developer perspective, these platform services in particular are some of the more interesting aspects. And so what we're going to do is spend a lot of time today kind of going through a lot of these different services and how you can take advantage of them to build great apps. And we're going to start by talking about web apps. And a cool service that we have inside Azure we call our Azure App Service that basically gives you the ability to build web apps, mobile backends, API apps, and do it in a way where we provide an environment that is auto-patched for you, that you can automatically scale without having to manually configure networking or load balancers, that has built-in support for things like continuous integration and continuous deployment. And so you can wire up your own CI/CD systems with it, and we'll show that in a little bit. And one that basically allows you to use whatever programming language you want, whether it's .NET, Java, Node, PHP, Python, Ruby, Go, you name it. And it now supports both Linux and Windows-based environments. And so you can choose the OS of your choice, the language of your choice, and we even actually now allow you to bring your own Docker container of your choice and basically deploy and run your solutions in it. And we'll show all of that throughout this morning. So with that, let's go ahead and do some demos. So we did poll hands at the beginning, lots of different languages that people are using. And what I'm going to do is sort of alternate between my PC and my Mac in terms of doing demos, just to make sure, again, we hit on the fact that you can use any technology you want with Azure and really have that flexibility. Since we did the last demo on the PC, we're going to switch now, if we can, to the Mac. And let's do the next demo here. And then we'll switch back and we'll do another app demo here on the PC in just a second. So what I'm going to do here on this my Mac is build a simple Node.js app, since we had a number of Node hands went up, and build and deploy and run it on Azure. So let's go ahead and do that. So I need your help. What would you like to call this app? Hello World. Hello World. Okay. Red shirt. Okay. What's that? Hello Red Shirt. Hello Red Shirt. Okay. Let's do, we're going to make a directory, Hello Red Shirt. Just going to make this all real. So there's nothing in the directory right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and just create a file. We'll call it server.js because it's a Node app. And I'm just going to paste in here simple hello world. So literally hello world. You got it. And this is sort of a super bare bones app, but it's mostly I'm trying to demonstrate Azure as opposed to a super rich app at this point. We'll look at richer apps later. But you get a sense here, I got hello world running locally here. And now basically what I can do is I can type node server.js locally. So this is going to run Node locally on my laptop. And then if I go to my tab here and type localhost 8000, I got hello world back. So simple hello world. So far, there's nothing super magical about this. And so far, we haven't introduced Azure yet. Let's do that now. So if I want to deploy this inside Azure, I'm going to use this Azure App Service that I talked about. and I'm going to create what's called a web app that runs inside of it. And so to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the new button. I'm going to say new web app. And I'm going to basically call this red shirt hello world. We'll see if anyone else has taken that. Hopefully not. Assuming the network comes back, please. There we go. I can choose where I want to deploy it. So I'm just going to say, let's deploy it here in the east of the US. And I'm going to pin this thing to the dashboard and hit create. And what this is going to go ahead and do is it's basically sending a command to Azure and saying, please go create a web app for me in East 2 of the United States. That's one of our regions here on the East Coast. And this is basically provisioning for me an environment into which I can deploy any type of app, including a Node app. It's going to have a load balancer automatically put in front of it. Azure is going to automatically manage the VMs that this app is going to run in. So I'm never actually going to see a VM. I'm instead going to think of this just as a web app that I can go ahead and manage and use. And it has things like auto scale and deployment all pre-built and set up for me. And you can see right now, this is a brand new app, and so the metrics show basically no activity yet because we haven't deployed anything. So let's go ahead and change that. So we can deploy this app in a couple different ways. We could use FTP and actually just literally FTP the files up if we wanted to. But from a Node developer perspective, Node developers tend to be fairly comfortable with Git and source control. And so instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this deployment options on the left-hand side. And I'm going to basically configure this app to support Git-based publishing of the code to it. You can see here I can deploy it through Git and GitHub or Bitbucket. In this case here, I'm just going to use a local Git repository to get started. I'm going to hit OK. And this is now basically configuring this app for Git-based deployment. And now when I click on this, I can go back to the overview page, and then you'll notice here to the left, or the right, I guess, there's this git clone URL. This is a special URL that was now available to me that I can copy to my clipboard, which will basically allow me to wire up my local Git to this web app instance and use it for deployment. So I'm going to cancel out Node running locally. I'm going to initialize Git in this directory. I'm going to add that server.js file, and I'm going to commit this file and just call it initial check-in. And then I'm going to say git remote add, name it Azure, and point that URL we just copied from the Azure portal. And this is wiring up what's called a git remote that I can now take my local source control system and use to push up. And so I now just say git push Azure master, enter in my password. And this is now doing a git deployment into Azure, specifically into that web app. And now if I go back into the portal, click this URL, I now have Hello World deployed and running in the Azure cloud up in Azure. And what's cool is if I want to deploy a new version of it, all I do is go back here. I could say, hello, New York, like so. I could then go ahead and go back to my folder here. I'm just going to say git add that change. I'm going to say git commit next update, or whatever comment I want. And I can just say git push Azure master. Again, this is going to go ahead and just deploy the diff, so the files that changed, and hit refresh. And now I have the new version deployed also now in the cloud, ready for me to use. And what's nice about the Azure experience is, I don't just have deployment now. For example, I can, if I click here, I can even see the changes. So here's that initial change. Now I could roll back if I wanted to. So if I wanted to basically redeploy the previous version, I can do that. So there's some nice additional deployment options. And you'll also notice that on the telemetry side, I'm now automatically getting telemetry about some of the activity. And so it looks like a number of people are already starting to hit the site inside the audience because I've now done 4 requests. as opposed to just the 2 I've done. So you can see it's real. And I can now see this sort of live telemetry coming in. And again, this telemetry views that we're having here on this main dashboard are just basically standard ones we give you. But if you remember back to that first demo, if I wanted to write something truly custom, I can always drop down to that log analytics syntax and query these logs as well. And whether these logs are a megabyte or 2 of HTTP data, or whether these turn out to be petabytes of log telemetry, I now have a really rich monitoring experience that I can take advantage of within my system. The other thing I take advantage of, since it looks like this app is becoming incredibly popular, almost exponentially changing. Let's see how many people hit it now. We're up to 15. So it's we're on fire here. We're growing out of control. I might want to basically add more capacity to this as word spreads. And I actually just realized, since we're live streaming this on Channel 9, there are actually about 5,000 people that are going to watch this in about 10 seconds because it's a little bit delayed, and so we'll get a lot more activity. So let's scale this thing up to make sure that we can handle the load. And obviously, you probably wouldn't need to scale a simple app like this, but let's just actually use this as an example of walking through how scaling can work with an Azure App Service. And so one of the things that we have here on the left nav is the ability to scale up and scale out. And I'm going to go ahead and click on, oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. If I go ahead and click on that scale out option, this is going to basically allow me to control how many VMs or resources inside this Azure App Service are actually servicing this app. And right now you can see I just have one. I have one instance. If I wanted to basically deploy this out across 10 machines, I can just change this to instance count 10, hit save, and it will scale it out. And now I have basically 10 VMs running my application. What's nice is I don't have to redeploy any app code. I don't have to play with a load balancer. I don't have to change anything. I literally just modify that number, hit save. I could also go ahead and instead of manually scaling it out, I could basically scale it out on a metric. And so in this case here, I can modify this so I can say I want to go between 1 and 10 VMs. Oops, 1 and 10. Start with 1. And I'm going to basically add a rule which says do that when the CPU of the system is greater than, let's say, 70%. And this will basically start with 1 VM. If the CPU of my web servers are getting pegged and it's above 70%, it'll add a second VM. If it's still pegged, it'll add a third VM, and so forth, up to 10. And then what's nice is if my CPU goes down and this app turns out not to be as popular as I might think, as the CPU goes down, Azure will automatically reduce the number of VMs for you down to 1 or whatever threshold you set. So this gives you a nice way where you can effectively handle any amount of load that comes in and deliver a great user experience. And at the same time, you're not overpaying and having lots of idle VMs that are running. Instead, you just have the VMs you absolutely need to basically do the job. And again, this is all built in. You basically would just hit save, and then this auto scale rule will immediately take effect, and within about 15 seconds, your app now has auto scale enabled. So simple way you can, again, basically build any app, deploy it, scale it, and you basically saw everything necessary to get going from a node perspective. Let's switch gears now and go back to the PC and show a similar experience, but this time with .NET using Visual Studio. And so what I have here is the latest version of VS. This also works with VS 2015. And I just have a simple Hello World ASP.NET MVC app that I've created. It could be a web forms app, it could be a Razor app, any type of flavor of ASP.NET this works. And I've not done anything custom to it. It's literally just Hello World, file new project. Now what I can do is then just right click on my project inside VS and click the publish command. And what this will do is give me a nice little wizard experience that says, do you want to create a new app? And so I could actually create a new app just like I did on my Mac here without actually having to go to the Azure portal. I could do it everything directly inside VS. In this case here, just so you don't watch me do the exact same thing, I can also just select an existing app that I've already created earlier. And what this does then is it launches this dialog inside VS. And it's using the Azure Management API so that it can basically list for me all of the app's that I have. And so you can zoom in here, you can see our different apps here. And I'm just going to go ahead and click scottusa.net. And this is then kicking off a build inside Visual Studio. And what we'll see here in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, almost right, is Hello World. And so this is basically, you know, how simple it is to get going. And again, if I wanted to change this to Hello New York, this also takes advantage of kind of incremental publishing, so that instead of republishing everything, it publishes just the file changes. And so the subsequent edit should be a lot faster. And there's Hello New York. So that's kind of version 2 that we've deployed. So simple, easy way, again, you can push directly from your development machine. In a little bit, we're going to set up a CI/CD system so that we can actually push as part of a build and after automated tests have run. But this is sort of just to get, kind of orient you for people that are new to Azure in terms of getting started. Let me show you another cool feature that we then have, and this again works regardless of language. That's a feature called deployment slots. How many people here have ever pushed code into production and discovered a bug? Only a few, good. It's good to know. Everyone here is very honest and very capable. It happens. And you know, I think one of the things that just in general is often scary is like when you deploy a new version of an app. And you know, of course, the problem is when it's scary to deploy a new version of the app, then you deploy it less often because you're scared. And then if you deploy it less often, then each deployment becomes even scarier because it's usually a bigger set of changes. And the velocity at which your updates are actually reaching your customers or your internal employees gets slower and slower, and so the value delivering often drops as well. And so, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do with the cloud and with Azure is how do we make it safe to deploy, and how do we actually enable you to increase deployment velocity because you feel always comfortable doing it, because you know that hopefully you can find any bugs before they happen, and then also if there are bugs, you can quickly recover as fast as possible. So let's go ahead and show off a cool feature you can take advantage to do that. And this feature is called deployment slots. And basically with a deployment slot, you just access this deployment slot item on the left-hand side of your app service. And with the deployment slot, you basically can create a private URL for the next version of your application that's going to run on the same infrastructure that your production system is running on, but it gives you the option to basically do last-minute production testing before the whole world sees it. And so we could name this deployment slot here. Let's call it Staging New York. You can name it whatever you want. You could put the version number or any string you want in it. And this is now creating this deployment slot on this app inside Azure. And so we should see in just a few seconds, this is going to pop up. And by the way, throughout the day, you're going to see this annoying data factory error that keeps popping up. And it's because one of my demos is shared by someone else who is back in Redmond who doesn't realize it. And they built an app today that has an error. It's not an Azure error, it's their app error. And I can't figure out how to turn it off because he doesn't give me admin privileges. And since I need to have one demo that's sharing a subscription, it will show up. Don't worry, it's not an Azure error, it is truly his bug, and he and I will chat about it later. So anyway, so we now have this staging slot, and what the staging slot's going to allow us to do is go back into Visual Studio, and now when I want to deploy a new version, so let's just call this version 2, I could publish it live into production, or I could create a new profile that goes and targets that staging slot instead. And so what I'm going to do here is hit New Profile. We'll go back to this experience. And now you'll notice that when I click on, for example, click on that apparently first. When I click on this, and then I click on this experience, you'll notice that I can actually choose any of the deployment slots. You can tell where I've been the rest of this week. And I'm just going to put it in staging so I can remember. And now when I deploy this app and hit publish, the changes won't go to everyone in the world. Instead, it's only going to go to people that hit this special staging URL. And this gives me, again, an ability for me to test this app before I actually throw everyone in the world at it. And so one of the things you'll notice here is it now says version 2. And then if you look at the URL up here, the URL is not scotchusa.net, it's scotchusa.net-staging. So it's a private URL. And in fact, if I went back to the standard URL and hit refresh, you'd notice that it still has version 1 of the application. So this gives me a way I can basically deploy my code and do last-minute testing against this private URL. And then and it's running on the same infrastructure that the production system's on, so it should hopefully approximate my production system as much as possible. And then once I'm ready to bring it to the world and make it live, I can basically go in here and just hit swap. And this is built into the top command as well as in the deployment slot UI. And I can now say, for example, let's swap between our production and staging slots. Hit OK. And this is now changing the load balancer inside the app service. And now, oops, no, don't look at my mail. And now, here we go. When I hit refresh on the main site, you'll notice version 2 is now live to the world. Cool. And then, yeah, thanks. And if I now go to the staging version, you'll notice that the previous version is now in that version. And so the beauty about this is I've now atomically rolled forward to the new version of my app. My users are all seeing it. And if now someone calls me and says, whoa, something went wrong, I can always go back really quickly and re-swap back. And so I'm just going to go swap, and we'll now go ahead and reverse those changes, hit refresh, and after about 3 seconds, I hit refresh here, well, a few more seconds. Let's see, it's swapping right now, so it's basically reversing back the changes. And now, let's see here, hold on. My browser is caching this. There. Now you can see when I hit the control key and refreshed it, it now says hello New York, and so we're now swapped back to V1 on that site. So really fast way I can roll back if I need to, if I've got problems, and a nice way I can do final testing before I go live. And this again, hopefully gives you more confidence to deploy more frequently. This also solves the classic problem that you often run into when you're deploying web content, where if you've got lots of files you're deploying, you worry about, hey, the HTML got updated before the JavaScript files, and are people going to see errors if they access files that haven't finished copying? This is a completely atomic deployment, so it'll be all deployed at once and go live simultaneously. So anyways, that's a little bit in terms of app service, some of the basics. And so far we've been developing everything locally and pushing from our development system. Let's now kind of keep going on and talk a little bit more about DevOps and about ways that we can automate the deployment even further and set up kind of a full continuous integration, continuous deployment model for deploying our code as well. How many people here are using CI/CD or CI today? First, how many people are doing CD as well? Okay, not everyone. So hopefully I will convert everyone to be using CI/CD in the next 20 minutes. So basically CI/CD is kind of a really good best practice that we recommend. And it basically with CI, and you can do it for any app, including client apps and desktop apps, basically means that you have source control, that you keep your code in, and you wire it up so that every time you check in any changes into your source control environment, you have a build server automatically take those changes and build them separate from your machine, but in a automated build environment, and that you run your unit tests against the output to verify the correctness. And that basically means that changes that only work on your local machine won't creep into your code base, and you have a nice automated way that you can catch things early when you have problems. With CD, you can go one step further, and then if your builds and your tests pass, you can then push them into either a production environment or often a QA or staging environment that you do additional testing on before you put into production. And if you can do that in an automated way as well, it basically means that you can very, very quickly, from the point at which someone checks in code, get it into an environment where you can do final testing and or get it live to a customer and deliver value faster and in a safer way because everything is automated. And so there's no manual scripts or any manual actions that you need to worry about screwing up. And what we've done with our Visual Studio Team Services offering, which is a free offering that you can use with Azure, there's paid tiers as well, but basically everything I'm going to show you here you can do completely for free. It gives you kind of an overall environment to set up this type of pipeline where you can store your code, you can do build and testing entirely in the cloud, and then you can push it into either a staging slot or directly into production inside Azure in a super easy automated way. And what's nice about Visual Studio Team Services is it works with any language and any operating system. So we have both Linux and Windows build servers. You can use .NET, Java, Python, Node, PHP, Go, Docker, you name it, it works. And beyond just doing build pipelines, it also does things like work item and bug tracking and Kanban board for agile planning and a whole bunch more. So what I thought I'd do is just actually show you off VSTS, and then we'll wire up a full interactive CI/CD environment with Azure to an Azure App Service so that we can do automated testing and automated publishing on each of our changes. So I am going to log into a VSTS portal here. And what I thought I'd do is rather than show you kind of Hello World or Contoso VSTS, let me actually show you a real Visual Studio Team Services environment that we use at Microsoft. And so we actually, all of our engineers now at Microsoft use Visual Studio Team Services, the same thing you can use to build our products, including products like Windows and Office. And Windows is probably the most complicated software project on the planet, which is not always a good thing. But it's, we have over 1 million build scripts in Windows, and it literally is over 1 terabyte of source code, many terabytes of source code. And we have over 10,000 Windows engineers now in a project that looks like this. This particular one here is one of my teams, which is the actual Visual Studio Team Services team that builds the Visual Studio Team Services service. And what you can see here with VSTS is you can customize your dashboard to have a very custom environment specific to your team. And so in this case here, I can see the bugs assigned to me, what the priorities are, different pull requests, and other areas that are trending. I could look at the code, obviously, and VSTS supports Git repos as well as TFS-based source control. And not only can I kind of see all the code and all the directories, I can even go ahead and it has nice visualization that works well for distributed source control projects like Git, where I can actually even see the branching and the rebasing that happens as people are checking in features and how all these code changes merge and work together. I can also go ahead and it has built-in support for what are called pull requests. And so there's a pretty nice pull request experience where I can actually see when someone submits code or people can comment on it, they can make updates to it before it's accepted. And so this is one that the team assigned to me as a pull request. And you can sort of see, again, comments here. It's great to have 20 of your friends give you feedback on the code, including anonymous, that's nice. But you can sort of see throughout the code here, again, you can do diffing, you can do comments, you can even do emojis that you integrate directly inside the experience. And so it ends up being kind of a very nice social tool that you can use to give feedback and do code reviews as well directly in the experience. And what's nice is, in addition to source control, it also does work item management as well as agile planning. And so this is an example. This is the real Kanban board that we have for VSTS right now. And so you can basically see these are the different tasks and work items assigned to individual engineers. And if I wanted to move Leon's priority, I could even go ahead and start dragging and dropping that around and use that for daily scrums and just overall status across the team. And all this stuff is integrated. So you can use Kanban separately, you can source control separately, but one of the nice things about VSTS is how you can merge them together. And so for example, on a Kanban task, you might notice here, I can even go ahead and create a new branch for this feature that's private. and directly link it there. And then once it's implemented, send a pull request and bring it back into the master. And so it kind of basically coordinate lots of people working the team together. And then last but not least, for any of the source control changes that happen, they will kick off builds. And so the good news is we have a couple builds in progress. Again, it's as exciting or not depending on what the actual person is checking in. But if I click on any of those builds that are happening right now, you can see one that it looks like one of the engineers is doing. And so you can actually see this is the build server doing an automated build in response to a check-in. And what's nice about VSTS is it allows you to basically, it'll dynamically allocate for you a build server, it'll snap your source code and compile it, it'll run all the tests, and then it releases the build server and wipes it completely so there's nothing remaining, and then puts it back into the Elastic pool for the next build to kick off. That means you don't have to have build servers sitting idle, you don't have to manage your own build environment. Instead, this is a cloud service that does it all for you. And everything I'm showing here, you can use for free. We have unlimited private free repos, and each free account to VSTS gets 4 hours of build time a month. And so you can basically do 4 hours of builds. If you want more than that, then you can pay for it. But for a lot of small projects, 4 hours of automated builds is probably more than you'll ever use in a month. And again, provides a nice, easy way you can get started and take advantage of it. So this is a little bit in terms of our VSTS project that we use inside Microsoft for our teams. Let's go ahead and just look at a simpler project. This is sort of like a Hello World project that I created earlier inside VSTS, and walk through kind of how I would take this and then wire it up to Azure so that not only can I use this for source control, but once that build happens, how do I connect it up and push the changes into Azure? So this particular project here has some code in it, and this is again just a standard .NET MVC project. And so you click on here, I got my controllers and so forth. You see the code like you'd expect. It's Git based. Again, I could be any language I want. And I've got tests in here as well. And so what I want to do is set this up so that whenever I check in code from Visual Studio into this project, I want VSTS to do a build of it, and then I want VSTS, if the build and tests are successful, to deploy it into the cloud, into a staging slot or inside an Azure App Service. Make sense? So how many people here have wired up a CI/CD environment before? How much fun was that? Yeah, lots of thumbs down. Wiring up CI/CD is not often the most enjoyable process because it's often a very manual and you're stitching together lots of different things. So let's go ahead and walk through what it would look like to build one in Azure. And so we'll take this project and let's basically wire up a full DevOps workflow with CI/CD. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project, a new web app, just like we did earlier. And so we'll call this Red Shirt Hello CI/CD version. And pin at the dashboard, we'll hit create. And so this is creating a new web app, just like we did earlier. The difference though is instead of now deploying directly from my IDE into this web app, we're instead going to configure it so that it pulls all its changes, or it pushes the changes from a build inside VSTS. So we got a vanilla web app created now. And then to wire up our CI/CD pipeline, we're going to go ahead and click this link called Continuous Delivery on the left-hand side. And this basically will show us here a little wizard. And this wizard, once it loads, there we go. If I click Configure, it's going to let me walk through wiring this up. And so I can basically say, let's go ahead and pick that project inside VSTS that I did earlier, called CI Demo. And you can see I can choose the repo and the branch and customize that if I want. The other thing I should mention here is if you click here at the top, notice that not only can I point to VSTS for my source control, but I can also point to GitHub or to Bitbucket or to any other external Git repo as well. So if I already have my code inside a GitHub repository and I already track my bugs and work items, you can keep it there. You don't have to move it. You can if you want to VSTS, but you don't have to. And this would allow you to point there, and then you can still use VSTS to do the build and the CI and CD pieces, but you can keep your existing workflow that you have already. Now in this case here, I got my source control already in VSTS, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to hit OK. Now, by default, we'll actually look at your project and try to understand what code is in it. And so in this case here, it said, oh, it's an ASP.NET project. And so it selected ASP.NET, but I could override it and choose other settings as well. In addition to running the unit tests, there's also an option here that we have built in which allows you to optionally simulate user load on the finished built app before it goes into production. And so this is a nice option where if you want to, for example, throw 250,000 users at the application to test performance, latency, and whether it holds up under stress, you can actually automate that as part of this process as well. And then when it comes to actually deploying it inside Azure, I could deploy it directly into the website, or again, I could use that staging slot feature that we looked at earlier, and instead wire it up to deploy into the staging slot. And this is a nice way that if I want to make sure I can do final testing and still have a human push a button before it goes live, I can do that. And it works similar to the one we just saw with the staging slot before. And now I hit OK. When I do this, Azure is now talking to VSTS and wiring up and configuring a full CI/CD pipeline, so that now every time code gets checked into that source control branch, a build will kick off, the test will run, and if the test passed, it'll push it into this Redshirt Hello CI/CD web app running inside Azure, all in a completely automated way. This takes roughly 60 seconds. And again, it's wiring up everything that's necessary. It's doing all of the right certificates, so it's a completely secure channel without any passwords being stored in my source control. And once it's done, it'll link to the actual build definition that's running inside VSTS. So I can even customize it further above and beyond kind of what the default settings that it populates are. So you can see it's done now. If I click on build definition, it'll deep link me into the VSTS portal. I could click on this sort of edit button if I want to see sort of what it's created. We're going to come back to this in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to click on this link right here, which is a build that's already kicked off in our build environment. And so the very first time you wire it up, it'll actually build any code you already have in it. And so this is my code in my CI/CD project, automatically being compiled now by VSTS. Once it compiles, you're going to see it basically starts running the unit tests that were part of that solution as well. And then assuming the unit tests pass, so you can see now it's starting the test assemblies. So it's running it. You can use any unit test framework you want. So if you're using Java, you can use JUnit. You can use XUnit. You can use NUnit if you're using .NET. It passed the test, and you can see now it is now uploading the app. It's completed, and now it is deploying it inside Azure. And so that complete automated workflow just happened literally by just running that wizard. If I go back now and look at this particular build that we created, I click edit. What Azure did for me automatically with VSTS is wire up what's called a build pipeline. And so these are the set of steps that'll happen every time a check-in occurs. And you can see basically for this .NET one, we did a NuGet restore to retrieve all the packages from our solution. It did a build of the VS solution, it ran the test, and then it basically published the symbols. And then a little bit later on, you can see it published the actual artifacts into Azure. And this is sort of a nice hello world default app. For any of these things, you can go ahead and click on the tasks and override any of the settings. And then what's nice is you can basically add whatever other build tasks you want as part of your pipeline. And so this is sort of a nice getting started pipeline, but you probably want to do additional stuff or tweak it even further potentially. You might want to deploy a database. And there's database tasks that you can use here that can automate the deployment of your database schema. You might, if you're, for example, coming from Java, you might be wanting to use Maven instead. So I could type add task Maven and replace my NuGet with Maven, and that would basically retrieve Java-based packages. If I'm using Node, I might want to use NPM. And we've got, obviously, NPM packages that you can use. And if I'm doing front-end development, I might want to use something like Gulp. We've got built-in tasks for that. And there's literally hundreds of built-in tasks. And what's nice is, for anything that's not built in, you can check out the marketplace and just click that link. And these are additional tasks that other people have built that let you do lots of other things. And so there's SharePoint tasks if you're deploying to SharePoint. There's Jenkins integration support. There's Docker and so forth. So rich way that you can go ahead and get a bunch of built-in functionality. And for anything that isn't built in or doesn't have a built-in task, you can also go ahead and add a bash script or a PowerShell script. So you can run custom arbitrary code as well as part of your build pipeline. So a lot of richness that you can take advantage of. You can customize your build pipeline however you want. And now that it's set up, and now it's wired up with Azure, this means that if I go into my editor of choice, so let's just open up project here. So we'll call this CI demo. And so I ran this yesterday in Boston, so this is my CI/CD demo Boston. Let's change this to New York. And you'll notice what VS does is it'll tell me, hey, let me move that out of the way. You can see, hey, a file has changed. That's the text we just updated. If I want to go ahead and commit this, I can just go ahead and say commit. And I'm just going to say updated text to New York. Commit and push. Checked it in locally, just pushed it up into VSTS. And now if I go into VSTS, not that one, this one, what I can actually see here, if I go to my code, is that just now that controller was updated. So you can actually see the code is now, oops, not that file. The code is now checked in. Into my code repository. And then because we have now CI/CD wired up, I also now have a build that is just kicked off. And if we actually click on this build server, you can see VSTS is already compiling that project again. It's going to run all the automated tests again, and if they pass, it'll then push it back into that Azure environment all automatically. So no human interaction needed, and I now have a complete build pipeline so that every time I make a change, all I need to do is check it in, it'll build, it'll test, and it'll be basically deployed in the cloud, all in a completely automated way. And so this kind of enables you to start moving really, really fast, because you no longer need to kind of click around stuff inside the portal. You no longer have to worry about skipping a step. You can automate the whole thing and have it be secure, and this will work just for yourself, but you could also have it be literally thousands of engineers working on your project and scale to that level as well. Now what's nice also is, I'm showing kind of the standard build experience. The other thing that we've done and try to wire up inside Azure, as you saw in the first demo, is all that monitoring and logic capability, so that once the thing's in live, you can also track to see how the application's doing. This view here in the top right, that's called application map inside here, is another sort of custom view that we provide that will look at your log telemetry and automatically figure out roughly the topology of your application and the availability of each of the different services within it. So you can see right now my app is at 96.77%. This is a different app. I got a problem, it looks like. What's cool is I can see each of the different sub-microservices, including the databases that it's calling, and you'll notice the milliseconds show you the average latency time for each of them. So I can say, whoa, this looks like there's a problem if it's 15.3 seconds. Looks like there's something wrong here in the server. I can actually see, for example, the slow or failed requests. And this will basically allow me to drill into directly in the Azure portal what's going on with this particular service. And so if I scroll down here, I can even see I've got errors coming from these particular URLs. Let's go look again at what might be happening here. This is pulling back the telemetry for that particular. You can see there's a dip there that we want to understand. If I drill into any of the failed requests, and again, all these are built-in views that we have, I can even look at the raw exception detail, again, in whatever language of choice that's throwing the error, and details around, where did this error occur, what client was hitting it, someone in Texas. And then what you might notice here, that's kind of cool is on each of these error dialogues that we have this button called New Work Item. And if you've wired up VSTS to work with Azure, when you click this button, it'll actually take the telemetry out of Azure and create a new bug inside your VSTS project that has all the telemetry populated. And now an engineer going to VSTS will see it show up. They can say new branch to create a private branch, fix the bug, push it as a pull request, the build will kicked off, the tests will run, and it'll get pushed into Azure. And now suddenly I can have kind of a continuous deployment cycle going on where I'm basically able to quickly deploy, get monitoring data, take that data to improve the app, and as soon as I make a change, update the app effectively in real time, all in an automated way. And that sort of, again, doesn't give you DevOps by default, but it allows you to take advantage of tools that make it a lot easier to start to embrace a DevOps and a very, very agile cloud development model. And again, it all works in a completely automated way. And if you want, you don't have to use this. So we've got hooks for Jira, we've got hooks for Splunk and Sumo Logic and other monitoring systems. You can use Kibana, you can use Logstash. You know, there's lots of other tools out there that people in the cloud community, in the Agile community, in the DevOps community take advantage of. And we support all those with Azure. But you know, hopefully you see with some of these built-in capabilities, we also kind of make it easier so that instead of you having to be the system integrator pulling together 20 different tools, you can leverage some ones that have been already pre-integrated for you and be immediately productive. Any quick questions on the DevOps pipeline or anything I've shown so far? Question there. Yep. App service. Yeah, so the question is, you know, in this case here, I didn't have a build definition already. And so I used Azure and it created a build definition for me automatically with it all wired up. And that's sort of nice if you don't have it already created. If you already have it created, it'll also just work. And so you just click on that last step and just point publish artifacts to Azure. And you can also start with VSTS and then just point to an existing set of resources you have inside Azure. So yeah, there's no need to always run the wizard, but what we found is the wizard is kind of makes it super easy. And so a lot of people just sort of start with that. And what's nice is it works with existing projects you have. So it's what we find is often people have existing source repositories, but they might not have the build. And the Azure Wizards gives them a nice default build definition that they can then modify, but you don't have to start with it. The other thing I should mention is the way I'm showing this here is I'm deploying an Azure App Service. That's just one of the ways that you can host your code. Later today, after the break, we'll do, we're going to cover data, but then we're going to cover containers and show a Docker-based workload and deploy a bunch of containers. And we have container tasks that can deploy this into like a container service inside Azure. And so we'll look at a bunch of container scenarios. I'll also cover serverless before lunch. And in the serverless section, I'll show you how you can basically deploy serverless apps. And all of those support the CI/CD workflow as well. And then we also now have inside VSTS, but then we also work with folks like Jenkins and Travis and others, the ability to just deploy apps inside a VM. And so if you're bringing your own framework or you're coming from an on-premises background where you're using, say, Cloud Foundry, or you're using Pivotal, or you're using an existing app framework that you're already using, you can easily integrate that as well and just deploy that inside virtual machines and still take advantage of these CI/CD tools or the existing ones that you already have. So again, lots and lots of flexibility to use what you want. And then what we're trying to do is take some of that flexibility and integrate it together to give you kind of a little bit more of a finished experience so you're not having to figure it all out on your own. Yeah?
So what you just said, this can be used on the platform. If I already have server in AWS, can I also use this to manage my code and deploy in AWS?
Yeah, so the question is, hey, what if you're, I talked about in the beginning hybrid, and I showed off, like for example, when we were managing VMs in that first demo, hey, I could even add an AWS instance into Azure's management console. Same is true for CI/CD. And so you're asking, hey, what if I have a existing project inside AWS? Cool thing you can do is if you go to your, say, a build create a, let me just click on that build definition we created earlier. We'll just hit edit. Here are the tasks, and I can deploy this into Azure. But if I go to, oops, where am I going here? Oh, sorry. If you click this add button for task, and then you'll notice there's this checkout marketplace. If you click that, and then search on AWS, there's also build tasks that AWS has provided that plug into VSTS. So you can also go ahead and deploy into an AWS environment as well. And that's, again, going back to the hybrid aspect, we want to give you maximum flexibility. Selfishly, I hope you try Azure. But we realize people have environments everywhere, and if you're locked into only working in one environment, that isn't going to work. And so I think this is one of the big differences that we have, even versus AWS, is that you can actually manage AWS and Azure resources. You can build AWS and Azure resources, and you can use our monitoring tools across both AWS and Azure resources. So yeah, you can even take advantage of it there. The other thing I should mention with Visual Studio Team Services is it also works with non-cloud resources. And so the majority of our customers are still building lots of systems on-prem. And so you can also do builds in the cloud and then deploy on-prem. And so you could deploy it into a VMware environment or a bare metal server environment or anything you already have behind the firewall. And for the build agents inside VSTS, you can even, if you want to, build on premises and integrate a build server that you already have with the actual source control and build definitions running inside the cloud. So there's a lot of cool hybrid stuff you can take advantage of. Maybe do one more question, then we'll take a quick break. Or two more, maybe. Yeah.
So you showed the monitoring feature. Is that also on-premise as well? And then how do you differentiate the monitoring feature versus like Ops Manager in the cloud?
Yeah, good question. So the thing I showed you here in the very beginning, where I was showing, for example, like inventory or update management, and I hit multiple computers, I kind of showed briefly, so this is running locally, so let's do manage multiple. The environment field here has both Azure and non-Azure resources in it. And so yeah, you can definitely go and add an on-prem server into this list and manage on-premises as well. And so that's definitely something we do see people do. And so your question is, how does this compare to, say, System Center Ops Manager? So some people use System Center Ops Manager with Azure as well, so you can do it that direction as well. The biggest difference here is it's a service. And so with Ops Manager, you'd need to stand up the System Center environment and have a bunch of systems specifically to run Ops Manager. The nice thing here is the service. It's built by the same team at Microsoft, and you can even get this capability with your System Center license as an option. And so we're trying to make it easy so it's not you have to rip and replace, but you can actually coexist and run both. But probably the biggest difference is this is now as a service so that you don't actually have to stand up your own infrastructure to run it.
Is it one agent for all those features?
It is one agent. And so, yeah, you're not also having to install lots of different agents. And one of the things that we are doing is also integrating the sort of infrastructure agent with what we call kind of our application management agents, so that you're not having kind of multiple agents for the app and the infra, which historically is what a lot of people do in the APM side. And instead, you have one agent that can actually do both with one log telemetry system that can scan both. That's something that we're in the process of rolling out. We now actually, for new customers, it's rolled out that we now have one log query system, and having one agent is kind of what we're going to as well.
Is that the application insights side?
Yeah, and so basically you'll think of app insights and op insights, which we used to kind of have as two things. There's still technically, there's two things, but now they all go into the same log system so that you can write queries against both of them, and that ends up being super powerful. One more question, then we'll do a quick break. Yeah. Okay.
I think this is cool, and being a man is still getting open to this. But one thing they would ask is, where did you get every time you deploy? Is this integration like ServiceNow type of systems where I just need to raise a
Good question. Yes, the question is, so like, hey, this is awesome, but what if you have a workflow where you need a ticket inside ServiceNow before you deploy? Or just more generally, how do you integrate with something like ServiceNow? I'll show this in the afternoon, but wait, well, since you asked, I'll show it now. One of the things we are doing is integrating with ITSM systems, both ServiceNow and BMC and others. And so one of the things you'll notice, and I'll demo this again this afternoon real quick, is like, for example, like with monitoring here, I can go ahead and click on alerts and create like an activity alert in response to anything. So I could basically say like when a deployment happens or when an error is occurring or, pretty much like there's like thousands of events I could trigger on. I can basically raise an alert or a ticket. And one of the built-in options here is ITSM. And so this can actually, we have a built-in ServiceNow connector. And so you can automatically integrate your alerts and monitoring with ServiceNow. And I believe we have a ServiceNow connector on the build side. So you could also, as the output of the build is open a ticket saying deploy. Or, a way to do it would be you build into a deployment slot and then raise a ticket saying it's ready to deploy. And then basically someone could just go ahead and automate deploy from the deployment slot directly in. So yeah, so that's the type of stuff we're integrating. The other thing we are integrating is, and you can do it today with webhooks because you can call any webhook anywhere, is both Slack channel as well as team support. And so you can also go ahead and as you're building or as you're kind of responding to alerts for your cloud apps, you can also have it show up in either Microsoft Teams or Slack as part of your channel with links that people can deep link into. And that ability to kind of get, again, kind of real-time feedback in a collaborative way, ends up being super powerful and something we hear a lot of people wanting to do. Cool. So we've covered a lot in the last sort of hour and a half. What we're going to do now is take a quick, call it 15-minute break. So you can stretch your legs, get some coffee, hit the restroom, and then we're going to come back. And in the afternoon, or in the next session, we're going to cover data. We're going to cover globally distributed databases and build some really cool graph database work. We're going to do containers and we're going to do serverless. So come back in a little bit. Thanks.